Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Soft Landing Podcast, a gentle space for self-discovery. We are your hosts,
Rafaela Fialo
and Eric Jones, and this week we're delving deep into the depths of sex clubs and dungeons, getting into the sexual spelunking, if you will. So in honor of that, I would love for us to share something sex-related that had us just really curious in the past week. So I'll start off. So I listen to podcasts all the time, and I was listening to one of my regulars, and they were talking, one of their guests was recently in Europe, traveling around, going to all the different clubs, having all the different fun. And through this conversation, one of the hosts shared that there is apparently this bar in Spain where like the situation with the bar is that I guess kind of recessed into the ground enough that people can stand at the bar, and then they have glory holes at the bar so they can be getting blowjobs while they're getting their drinks.
Wow.
And that just, I don't know.
That's a 2-for-1 special.
It's a 2-for-1 special, exactly.
It's happy hour all the time.
It is happy hour all the time, And I was just like, that is just, one, really clever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, just the people thinking about different ways to enjoy sexy time. Mm-hmm. And then, two, the fact that, we can have this space of, like, a bar that then is incorporating just this really fun sexual component to it, which I feel is very in alignment with our conversation today.
Way to start it off.
Thank you. So, I'm really excited about that. Just really want to share that. But
yeah. Thanks,
and so
Eric.
with that, do you want to introduce our guests for today then? This is our first episode with a guest.
Yes,
we're really excited.
Very, very excited.
Yeah.
And so in alignment with that energy and to help us with this topic of sex clubs and dungeons, we have Luna Matatas.
Yay!
Hi. Luna is a sex and pleasure educator with over 10 years of experience in sexual health and wellness internationally and locally. Her playful approach to sexuality draws on the creativity, confidence, and communication skills that we all need to fulfill our pleasure potentials. Luna is the creator of Peg the Patriarchy. If you haven't heard of it, listen.
Love it.
There's a whole history in itself that would take a whole other podcast, but we're gonna reel it in.
Bring me back.
Bring you back. Meditate, medicate, and masturbate merch, and that is just also, to me, an ideology, a theology, a psychology.
I want that. I might have to make some purchases after today.
Listen. And also, Fuck Like a Goddess brand. Yes. So she is the host of B Vibes podcast, all about anal sex, the Plud podcast. She's been doing some really, really affirmative, inclusive work with Marla Renee Stewart and their kinky tapas. I mean, also just listen to these names that they come up with. Like,
listen, just snappy. I love it.
So yes, that is a little bit about Luna. There's so much more to learn about her, and we will add all of the links and URLs and Instagrams that you can access to learn more about Luna. But welcome. Hey.
Thank you for that warm welcome. Thanks for having me. And I'm thinking about, maybe we need a GoFundMe for like this glory hole bar somewhere.
Yeah, let's make that happen here. I would love that. Both sides.
You get a drink, someone else gets a drink, It's
yes.
like really
good. Well, before we get into some of the questions that our listeners have submitted to us, would you mind kind of just speaking about your own experience with sex clubs and going to dungeons and kind of going to these spaces where there are going to be nudity, maybe sexual acts happening? Like, how did you get into it? Like, do you remember?
Yes.
Wait, do you remember your first time going to a sex club or dungeon? Could you tell us about it?
Yes.
Absolutely. So I was about a few months out of my divorce. So I had left my marriage, a monogamous marriage, after 10 years. And I kind of knew I was kinky, but I also didn't know. So my best friend had also left her marriage, and we were both like, maybe we're kinky, maybe we're queer, maybe we're slutty, maybe. Turns out we are all the things.
Yes.
And one of the first things we did was we were like, let's go to this like sex club that we heard about. We didn't really know what was going to happen there, so we strapped ourselves into like these corsets. We got in the car. We didn't know what to wear. I couldn't breathe. Like my titties were all up with like the steering wheel. And then we got outside and we were watching everybody go inside. And we thought, are they older than us? Are they partnered? Are they hotter than us? Are they, we were comparing ourselves to everybody going in, trying to figure out, like, are we going to belong? And we called our mutual best friend and we said, we've been sitting outside for like 45 minutes. What should we do? And he's like, go the fuck inside. So there was all of our own kind of stuff coming up, but also the desire for this adventure and like a little bit of a risk. So we needed that push. And we went in, we were terrified the whole time. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know any etiquette. We didn't know how to talk to people. There was an overwhelming amount of cis men kind of roaming around, just saying, what's your name? Want to have sex? What's your name? Want to have sex? So it was very overt in the club that we went to. And after a while, we kind of just tapped out and really just enjoyed watching and being around people having sex, hearing live sex noises, being in these uncomfortable corsets that we wouldn't wear anywhere else. So it was also about the experience of like this unique social environment that most people don't have access to. Yeah. So we did not have sex that night.
But you were around it.
Yeah.
And I think that can really teach us a lot about observing our own sexuality in response to other situations, other people, because I think we do feel so much pressure to show up a certain way, instead of learning to kind of sit back and allow our inner voyeur to come out and kind of breathe a little bit.
Yeah. Which is in of itself kinky,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Big voyeuristic vibes.
Oh, so I would love to, first off, thank you for that. I feel like there's so many points in that story that I feel like we're going to be able to touch on in our conversation. So you already kind of encapsulated what I feel like a lot of people are thinking or feeling, even thinking about going to these places. So I'd love to maybe hear from you, like, what are some of those misconceptions that people might have?
Yeah. So a lot of people feel that when they go to these spaces that they have to look a certain way. So usually we think about like kind of conventional commercial attractiveness. You have to be thin, you have to be young, you have to be white. And there are definitely people who go there that look like that. But actually for a lot of sex clubs and swinger spaces, people are ranging anywhere from, I'd say, their mid-20s to like their 70s, so it's really a wide range of people that are going. And sometimes, people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s actually have a different concept of the body and nudity. And so there might be more liberation in those ages because, the jig is up. We're not 22. So there's kind of this intimidation of feeling like, is my body going to be desirable there? Are all of these ideas around shame going to show up for me and maybe block connections? Another big misconception is that you have to have sex, that if you're going there, that you have to commit to any kind of sex or play with anybody. You could definitely go and be a voyeur. You could definitely go and practice other types of sexy skills. So flirting or socializing, talking to people in a nude environment, not necessarily that maybe you're attracted to, but it's just a different place to socialize. And I think there's this also misconception that you are entitled to sex if you go to these places. And you are not. People are there for connecting. Some people are there to hook up. Other people are there, getting maybe their second, third try in building confidence in connecting with people. So there's many different goals and reasons why people go to these places. So figuring out your own can help you set some intentions when you go.
I love that. And it makes me think of that there's almost like this hurdle to even get to being able to be ready to go, right? I think of even when you shared your story of like being outside, you're there, but even then, you still were like, oh my gosh, are they going to be into us? Are we going to be into them? Are they attractive? Are we attractive? Are they going to be this? Are they going to be that? And then that external force being like, just go the fuck in, right? But like, how do we have that when we don't have that person telling us just go the fuck in, right?
Yeah. Like, I feel like anyone listening, just call us
Yeah.
and we'll tell you. You know, but yeah, I think when you don't have that external force, sometimes it is about finding it internally and kind of allowing yourself to step close to that edge of discomfort, feeling kind of risky, but also really knowing that you have so many options. You don't like it, you can leave. No one wants to have sex with you, you can go home and masturbate. You know, there really is kind of a reality check around how big of an experience this is going to be in terms of like a tangible risk for people. And so setting those ideas, like thinking about what you want to do, what you don't want to do, and what you're willing to do. So maybe you want to have sex, but you don't want to have oral sex, and you're willing to kind of make out with people if there's a connection. So giving yourself a range of goals instead of like, I must be desired, I must have connection, can also help you feel a bit more like, okay, I'm also co-creating this environment. I'm not just sort of a prey to all these predators, that I'm also giving myself the opportunity to create connections.
Yeah, I have choice here.
Yes.
And I really think it's important to kind of have that reminder, because when you don't know about a space, I guess sometimes you don't know what the rules are, the expectations are, and you may feel kind of pressured in a sense to show up a certain way, or like, oh, do I have to take on someone advances, or whatever the case is. So having that reminder of like, no, you can, this is still a place where consent is wanted and prioritized. Like, you don't have to say yes just because someone propositioned you, and being really clear of that too, and that you can change your mind.
Right.
Yeah.
And so with that, y'all, let's take our first break. We'll be right back. And welcome back, listeners. Okay, so we're talking about these things. How do we start to then begin to figure out if this is what we want to do? How do we go about making that happen? So I would love to just talk about, like, first and foremost, right, how do we find the right sex club or dungeon for us? Like, if I'm out there trying to figure out where I'm going for my first experience, how do I even navigate that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because different sex clubs create different kinds of environments. So some might be geared really towards more couples and kind of swingers action. Some sex clubs are much more queer friendly and maybe attract a different kind of values kind of crowd. And then there's dungeons. So dungeons might be spaces where people are holding parties that are kinky, that you might get invited to, or you might want to find. And then there's private dungeons. So you could rent a dungeon with your partner and or yourself and go figure out the equipment and try things out. I think doing some research on their websites is helpful, because they might have like FAQs for first timers, but then also going into some of the communities that are formed in these places. So lots of them have things like FetLife groups or Facebook groups, or spaces where they're sharing experiences or even looking for new connections. Some clubs even have offline things. So they might have more of a casual like bars night for all their members to meet each other before committing to a club night.
Nice. I want to ask you, I don't know how, many people don't know, but could you maybe explain what FetLife is for maybe those who are like learning right now?
Yes, it's part like it's basically Facebook for Kinksters. And so it's not so much of a dating site, but it's where people have profiles, they post to discussion forums, sort of old school style message and threads. It's a great place to find out about events in your local area. I would take the information on there with a grain of salt, because it's a lot of people sharing their personal experiences, and that's great for inspiration, but often it's not great for instruction. But you can definitely find a lot of spaces will have groups that might have special communities. So I look for BIPOC groups on there, or I look for queer women groups to to connect with. And that's a great place if you just don't have necessarily kinky friends in your life, or you're not sharing your kink with the friends in your life. It can be reassuring that there are people out there who are also doing this thing, who are also navigating at this level. And there are people who are super advanced and have been in the scene for many years and have a lot of experience to share.
I would say I really love this idea of like use it as inspiration, not instruction. I that piece right there, I'm like, yes, absolutely, because yeah, a lot of people have a lot of different ideas about what they're doing, what they've experienced, and so I really love that piece of like as inspiration, but then doing your due diligence, right, to really make sense of, is this the right fit for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I first joined FetLife, I fell into that trap. I thought, oh, I guess dominance has to look this way, submission has to look this way. And of course, it's a lot of largely white cisgender bodies and a lot of very loud cisgender heterosexual white men that are leading a lot of these conversations and old guarding things. Then we've got the factions that are trying to create more inclusivity, but also just kind of liberate us from only one way of doing things and a hierarchy of way of doing things. So I slowly grew out of, let me just do what everyone is doing into my own. Oh my gosh, kink is so creative. Why wouldn't I create my own thing? Why wouldn't I listen to my own creative wisdom?
I love that. Thank you. And then I think the next piece for me is like, okay, so we've, figured out we want to go to this sex club, ready to go. What does it look like to then decide, like, do I go by myself? Like you, do I take a friend? If I have a partner? Like, how do we start to have those conversations either with ourselves or with our friends or significant others?
Yeah, yeah. If you're going by yourself and you do have a friend, I mean, great, because then you've got a bit of a buddy system. It is going to be a little bit different of an experience because when you're with your friend, you're more likely to kind of stay with your friend. You might look a little bit unapproachable, just the two of you. And that might be good for you for your first experience, maybe just observing. If you're going with a partner, it's definitely something you want to have conversations about beforehand. So, what are your expectations of going? Are you going to play with other people? Are you going to play in front of other people? Are there things that you are looking for? Like, would you like to have a threesome versus just maybe kind of making out with people and flirting with people? Having the conversations around will, want, and won't is really helpful in guiding the intentions for the night, but also helping you pump the brakes on parts of your fantasy that might just not be ready for reality. Like, it may sound really sexy to just go to a club and find a couple and have sex with them, but then it's going to be, maybe it's uncomfortable for you to watch your partner kiss somebody else, and so the hotness of the fantasy gets a little bit dimmed when we come into reality until we can support our confidence in it.
I also like the opportunity to have a conversation about, like, what if this is about us? Like, what if we're the main characters? So we're going to this sex club to have sex with one another, with an audience, and kind of wanting to just have that exposure, because that can be so arousing for a lot of people. People have sex in public all the time in ways that other people did not consent to, right? Like, I'm at the park just trying to get my exercise, trying to do my walk around the park, and someone's up against a tree having sex. Like, I didn't consent to that. However,
right.
if we can go to a sex club, then we are in a place where that is okay, and we can, experience those tingly sensations of people are watching us. Right. Or maybe not, because they're like, okay, they're having sex, move on to the next one. Just another group of people having sex here.
I love that. And it also makes you think of, like, even like when you get there, how to have like pre-planned ideas of when those moments do come up of like, oh, actually the fantasy is not fantasy anymore. So how, like, what's the plan on like pumping the brakes? Like, do we have a safe word for when we go to the sex club together, right? Do we have the ability to check in with each other so that we're able to like make sure that we're on the same page still?
Yeah.
And not just continue to do something because, that back to that idea of like, we're at the sex club, so we have to do what we think we should be doing here.
Yeah, those are such good offerings for people to consider, because I think there's the excitement about it, and I'm very much a slow to warm person in these kinds of environments. And when I used to go to sex parties and sex clubs with my bestie, she would get in, her clothes would be off in 20 minutes. And I'd still be standing at the door drinking whatever like non-alcoholic punch was available, waiting, to get things going. And so you might have different speeds in your couple. If you're going as with your partner, you might set aside like a certain amount of time. So maybe we're going to spend 30 minutes like just checking out the space. Let's check in with each other. Are we okay with someone going off and doing something, or exploring on their own and not doing anything? Are we okay with certain configurations over others? Like maybe one person wants to have a male female threesome, and somebody else wants like an all same gender threesome, or whatever is happening in your fantasy that might have different interpretations for each other is super important to talk about. But for my own practice, I like timing, I like meeting points, and also there's a certain level of discomfort that might come up for you. And does that mean you shut everything down for the couple? Maybe. And so talking about like what would be we're pulling the alarm bell, we're getting out of here kind of experience, versus I might get a little jealous, so you might see me kind of wander off because I need some time to myself, but I'll come back and I'll be okay. So also letting our partners know what it might look like if we're checking out or if we're having a moment.
Yeah. And great conversation to have with your friends too, like whoever you go with, because I can imagine a lot of feelings come up. Like you were talking about your friend in 20 minutes, she is ready, but right. What if I have some feelings about that? What if I'm like, oh, maybe I'm not attractive or desirable? What if what if one friend is getting hit on all the time? I mean, what's the difference between when you go to a regular dance club and one friend is always getting drinks and being asked to dance and giving her number out, and you're just sitting there like, nobody's hitting on me. So I can imagine there's some of that feeling happening at a sex club when you're thinking like, oh, okay, this is a place where quote unquote anything goes, but ain't nothing going over here, So to be able to check in with one another, and also even more, I think with couples, if maybe it was more one partner's idea than the other, and they're just like, okay, I'm just kind of going because this is your fantasy. And then sometimes it can flip, right? The one who was really excited is like not having a good time, and the one who didn't care too much is like, this is great. It's like, we're going home. So like having the conversations about what this can look like, but also the things that you aren't sure is going to happen. Like, and I think that's why you do have to kind of do your research, listen to podcasts like this to think about the things that may not come to mind because you're thinking of all the fun things or the really quote unquote, I don't know, bad things that you're like, okay, worst case scenario, this may happen. But there's so much in between that could happen in a space like this. So
absolutely. And I do a check-in with myself before I go every time, whether I'm going alone or if I'm going with a partner. And I have a list that's just listing everything I'm anxious or nervous about that might happen, and then all the things that I'm excited about. And the excited things help anchor me in like, okay, yes, you're jealous, but also you wanted to come here and be hot in lingerie. Great, check. And it sort of helps me balance, what's the stuff I'm already bringing in to this experience and what's the stuff that I'm looking to get from this experience. So it really helps me self-regulate, but also communicate what's happening. Whereas I used to just shut down and go cry in the bathroom because I was jealous. And then feeling like nobody, all those things you listed, like nobody likes me, no one's attracted to me. And that's often very hard to move past if this is the first time you're allowing that stuff to the surface. It's happening in public. You've not prepped your partner or yourself for that happening. And lots of other things might be, okay, I didn't like when you did that thing, but we can talk about it tomorrow. It's not that big of a deal. You have your fun. So there's a lot of opportunities for compersion, seeing your partner have a really great time. I was jealous when my friend would go off and I learned what her orgasm was, and that's how I could find her at the parties. And,
I love that.
And I started to just be really happy. I'd be standing there drinking my punch and I'd be like, you know what? Good for her. Good for her. My bestie's that hot girl over there doing that thing. And then I'd find my own groove. If I sat there and kind of went stank into all these narratives that exist, whether I'm at the sex party or not, then really that's something that's really stealing from my experience in that moment. And sometimes you can't control it, but through practice, for me, it's definitely helped to have tools.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And if you're feeling and looking stank, then people are probably, hopefully, are reading body language, like, okay, they don't want to be bothered. So then that kind of creates that affirms that narrative. Is like, see, no one's approaching me. Well, you're not too approachable right now for a variety of reasons.
I think all of this too, for me, it kind of goes into this idea of like safety planning before you go to. And so I feel like we definitely hit on kind of like the communication pieces, check-in pieces, but I also want to talk about like safer sex practices, STIs, things like that too, because I think that is also something as a part of the conversation of how do we think about these things before we go into spaces with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Most clubs are really well equipped with condoms and lube. But if you need anything beyond that, if you like a specific brand of barriers, or if you like dental dams or gloves, those are things I would suggest you pack your own bag. And you can definitely have conversations with people that you meet and figure out, like, what's comfortable in terms of barriers or testing. But my rule is that I figure out what barriers I'm comfortable with, and then I go into an environment having my last testing date, because oftentimes you're meeting people really quickly. You're meeting people in an environment where people are trying to connect. So there's a risk of people lying. There's also a risk of people just being not informed. And so thinking that, some of the activities they do are actually, not risky activities for sexually transmitted infections. So figuring out with your partner, okay, like, are we having oral barrier free with people? Are we returning oral barrier free with people? Like what kinds of things would make us feel comfortable? And if something changes, if boundaries change, you discuss that the next time. Like, we don't change boundaries in the middle of what we've already agreed, because emotions are high, vulnerability is up, arousal is up. And so we're not really making decisions from the same place that we consented to beforehand.
Right. And I think in the moment it can be so difficult to renegotiate things. And so I love that idea of also being like, this can be a further conversation later, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be something that we deal with right then, but like making note of it so that that's something that, if and when we do choose to do this again, how can we make sure we're treating it as like an iterative process for us to just continue to improve on the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to get into situations with an ex of mine where we'd be at sex clubs and he'd be wanting to have bareback sex with people. And then I was feeling like, well, I don't want to be the buzzkill. I mean, we'll worry about it later. But it felt like such a violation looking back on it. Like, we had already agreed to things. And for those of us who find it hard to speak up about our boundaries in the moment, maybe we need more digesting time. That really puts us at a risky spot to have to reassert in that moment. So agreeing beforehand, like, these boundaries can change later, but for tonight, this is what our container is. This is what we're guiding the experience with.
Yeah, that hits on so much, because when it comes to safer sex practices and barriers, people do change their mind without communicating it with the person that they're engaging with. I'm thinking of like stealth behavior and stuff like that. And there can be a lot of manipulation and gaslighting. So I really love this reminder to say, hey, we agreed that this is how we're going to protect ourselves and try to stay as safe as possible. If you change your mind, cool, we'll talk about it for next time. But that is not okay for you to just say, away with the condoms, because you think this person's really hot and your arousal was at 1,000. So.
Yeah, exactly.
So as I was getting prepared for this, I came across this idea from, I think her name's Effie Blue, it's a place called Hacienda Villa in New York. And it's this thing called like BIDS. So boundaries, intentions, and desires. And so I don't know if you've heard of that framework before, but I thought it was like really interesting because, like boundaries, of course, as we're talking about, like what are our no-goes, but then intentions are, what do I want to get out of this experience? How do I want to feel? And then the desires are, what do I want to see happen while we're there? And so I would love to maybe talk about a conversation of what does that process look like for you as well, for people to be thinking about outside of all this stuff too, like how do I prepare myself kind of, I guess, mentally of what am I not okay with and what I am okay with?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I find people are in two different camps. So some people are like, let's just experience everything and then I'm going to know what I like from that experience. And then other people are start with a more stricter menu. So here's like the three things that I'm open to tonight, but I'm not open to a whole bunch of other things. So sometimes that's a bit of a personality and an approach kind of thing. Sometimes that's about what's suited best for the partnership or the friend that you're going with. And I think the emotional part of it is so important to consider as well. Like whether you're doing sexy club kinds of things or kinky kinds of things, because this is such a heightened arousal environment. It's a fun environment. There's lots of adrenaline going. There's dopamine going. You know, we might get into ideas and desires that we're not necessarily emotionally prepared to take into reality.
Mm-hmm.
And for some of us, I mean, I've definitely been in that space where I was like, I wasn't going to do this thing tonight. And then I ended up doing the thing, was not prepared, had an amazing time. And then there was other times where I was like, oh my God, like it felt almost high being in that environment and
Yeah.
doing things because it was available or because like it just felt so erotically charged. So knowing that, you know, you can take care of yourself if you make these kinds of emotional mistakes, but preparing yourself with like, what are some of your insecurities? Do you have body insecurities? Do you have shame around particular sexual activities? Is there a chance that something might come up from your past? You know, I had started to have, the longer that I went to sex clubs, the more that I had experiences also that weren't great. And so I started to anticipate potential trauma happening at certain clubs, which was very different than my let me do all the things, you know, naive kind
Yeah.
of experience. So noticing if there might be particular triggers that would be present for you. I just came back from Hedonism Jamaica, which is an adult lifestyle resort, and I was there with a swingers hotel takeover. And so I knew one of my triggers might be that this was a fitness group. And I was like, you know, I'm going to be triggered at some point around my body shame.
Yeah.
And so having that knowledge kind of prepared me for when it started to creep up. And I think that in some ways it actually dulled that kind of burn that usually comes up in that environment, because I also had all these ideas of what I was desiring out of this. I was desiring connection. It was a professional experience. It was a way to experience a different community as well. Anyways, the emotional kinds of check-ins I think are helpful before, during, and after. So I love the idea of bids. I tend to use will, want, won't. So it
Right.
includes desires, openness, and also barriers. And I used to meet a lot of couples at sex clubs that would have really strong barriers. Like we could have sex, but you can't kiss my partner. And so I also learned to figure out like what worked for me. And so for me, that kind of experience is not desirable. And I used to be more open to it just because I didn't know I could say, oh, I don't want that kind of threesome. I want a different kind. So even fleshing out your fantasies with your partner, like what do they look like? What's like the energy behind it? What's the intention and flavor that you want to bring?
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And I think what I love about all we just said too is that that's for like the first timer and the seasoned person, right? Of like every single time is going to create different experiences, and so how can we be mindful of it each and every time we go so that we are then, you know, for me it's like, how do we have the best time possible?
Yeah. How do we have the most joy? How do we set
Yeah.
ourselves up for joy? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And with that, why don't we take another break, y'all? Okay? See you in a sec. Welcome back, y'all. Now, let's jump into it. Okay, so with that, I feel like we've like talked so much. Now, like getting to the club, right? So I think up to now we're like, how do we even get to the place where we're ready to go? I would love to talk about what are some of the common rules and etiquettes that you have seen during your time. You know, because I've know earlier you mentioned like there are different types, different spaces, but what are some common themes that you can really share for people to understand?
Yeah, generally consent is really huge, and really obvious verbal consent is preferred in these environments. So most places have an ask once policy. If you've asked someone if they want to play and they say no or not now or maybe later, you don't ask again. Many places have specific designated areas, so where maybe single males aren't allowed to go or only couples are allowed to go, to kind of encourage people to connect in different ways. And there's also some places will say you have to be either completely nude or you have to be in lingerie. It really just depends on the environment. And I think like comparing it to things like bathhouses, which are frequented by gay men, that the environment is it's different, and so there's different cultural rules and different social norms that happen in spaces. I know whenever I teach to queer men audiences, they're like, this is way too much conversation. You know, like we're not checking in about all these things. Right?
Let me tell you, it's not. No.
Yeah, it's not happening. We're not talking about will, want, won't. We're like, where, you know?
It's like, oh, you looked at me for 2 seconds longer than usual. Okay, let's go.
Yeah. So there might be things that you might have to kind of figure out socially, but usually the club websites will say explicitly what the rules are. One other rule around engaging in sort of public play is that, you know, you respect sort of people's distance. So even if you're a voyeur, you standing super close to the action is really going to change the scene for those people, right? So, you know, maybe stand like an arm's length, maybe a good, like, if you're in the splash zone, you're too close. Right?
We can feel your presence.
Yeah.
Very important.
And that you ask to join. Like you cannot just like jump in just because there's a bunch of people.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, going back to what you mentioned about having workshops with gay men and how they're like, this is the culture. I'm really curious about, you know, in culture in general, we have this air of like, this is how it's always done. Don't question it. When in fact, a lot of people want to question it. They're not happy, satisfied. They want to make some changes, but they feel like they can't because this is the culture. So I'm really curious about that, where it's like, how many people would love to be like, I would love a will won't, you know, or a bid or whatever the case is, but they feel like they can't because people will look at them like, we don't do that here. What are you doing? So did you ever have like that piece come up, I guess, or was it just kind of like, oh, okay, well, on to the next slide?
No, I think that there's such a growing vocal community amongst like queer men that is advocating for just more options of how to hook up. So either more time doing certain activities that maybe aren't so like centered, so maybe not even not having penetration, and doing other types of outer course, other types of sensual activity, or kink without sex is definitely something that lots of people enjoy. So I think that there is this redefinition once we let go of these traditional ideas of masculinity, femininity, and really just putting everything into an either or box. Like we have to either be super down or we have to be super communicative. I think in environments where there's more cisgender heterosexual people, there still exists a very strong patriarchal power. And you can see that in many swingers environments where there is a sense of like women are objectified, so they're the ones who are like decorated, they've got all the cute outfits, and dude shows up with like a golf shirt, you know, like there's not this like just try a little,
not a golf shirt.
Come on.
Oh, that's disappointing.
Touch your nails,
or Hawaiian, depending if you're
not Hawaii. Oh gosh, she's made it worse. Okay.
Easier access, you just pop it open, you know.
Oh, okay.
Okay, if you're gonna do a performance with it, yes. You know, you're just gonna stand there with it, no. So I think even just getting into that fun part of it, like really just kind of gearing yourself up for the kind of social and sexual like vibe that you want.
I love that, and I appreciate that question too, because I was affirming, yeah, that's definitely an experience. I also don't necessarily agree with that either. I definitely think that even with like gay bars can very quickly become sexual spaces, you know, and so it's just a very different experience. I mean, I've been at clubs before where people are groping me, and I'm like, you didn't even say a word to me, hello, right? And so like, I think there's definitely bigger conversations of what could be different about some of those, particularly like queer male spaces for sure.
Yes, I
Absolutely.
think also being in a black or brown body just brings up so much
Yes.
other thoughts and anxieties. I know there's been places where I'm like, I don't really want to deal with feeling like I'm being fetishized or
Yes.
telling me I'm blank because I'm blank or I'm, you know. And so it can be a real turnoff and, you know, trying to hold space for an open mind and setting your boundaries to also being realistic and asking around and saying like, what is this space like? Is it a safe
Right.
space for people who look like me in this body with this complexion and this background, or do I just need to find somewhere else? And places like FetLife or Facebook groups is a great way to find out instead of having to always choose learning through experience. Like, well, I guess I just got to go to find out. You can
Yeah.
still take their experience with a grain of salt, but at least you have a little bit more information to work from.
Yeah, I love that, and I would love to hear more about your thoughts and experiences around that too, because I think that's, you know, again, I think you said at the beginning too, right? Like this assumption of like these spaces are particularly really white, right? And
White
fit and
and
able-bodied
able-bodied
and
Yep.
same page.
yes, same page.
Checked all the boxes.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, I spent they are generally, I mean, I live in a really diverse city. I live in Toronto, and still many of our kink spaces are super white, and super like male men kind of dominated, even though there's lots of feminine dominance types in the city. They're I think for a long time for me, I went to these spaces anyways because I there weren't any BIPOC spaces that I was aware of. I think there's more now, especially for young people. Um, and yeah, there were experiences where there were so many microaggressions, I just couldn't count them. But I also didn't know what my kink was, and so I was allowing kind of the community to like tell me what it was because it was affirming. It was affirming to be a submissive femme, and I'm much more of a switch, and my dominant side tends to be the side that I use in public. And I didn't discover that because I didn't see any representations of fat, femme, you know, BIPOC doms. There was just these like either older white male with a beard, daddy kind of doms. So it did mean for many years I was trying to fit into boxes that like weren't just didn't make me thrive. But I
Right.
did meet people, and those people were ones that helped me evolve in different ways. So either through like one-on-one play, which I felt safer many a times to actually experiment. I think when you're in super white environments, like learning rope, for example, is really intimidating because you feel there's this extra pressure to be perfect because you're
Right.
the only BIPOC person in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big challenge. If you can get together your friends, even if they're like not kinky, but they just want to do something different, they just want to be an adventurer or a voyeur, going with your own crew or your own group is so much more supportive, because the reality is that a lot of the large scale events, a lot of the large scale businesses for this are white and white owned. So it depends. If that environment is a complete no-go for you, then definitely doing more private play. If you're open to that and you can bring your friends, amazing, because you can take up some space. And I think for a long time, I just didn't go to spaces after I had been in so many white spaces. I was like, I'm not doing public kink anymore. I'm not going to like sex clubs. And going back to hedonism, where this group was probably like 90-95% white, was really interesting because I was ready to be, I was like, these are not my people. These are not, you know, I had such a great time. It was like connecting in a different way, and it just reminded me there's a multiverse. You know,
Right.
there's a multiverse of kinksters and sex positivities. And while this is not my community, this is definitely something that grew my edges in many ways. It
Yeah.
really like took me out of my groove and like helped me carve some new ways into kink and learning and also gifting learning to people.
I
Yeah.
love the term multiverse of Kingsters. I just want to say that right now as a like comic book nerd and movie nerd. Like that just really satisfied me. So thank you for that.
Oh, I'm
Love
so
it.
glad. Yeah.
Something else is coming up around accessibility. We're talking about a dungeon, first of all, and I'm thinking of my own experiences and just imagery of it being hard to get to, like literally a lot of stairs,
Yeah.
and we're talking about folks who are maybe disabled or have other access limitations or barriers, and how they will not be able to access these spaces. So sometimes it's like once you get to the space, we're talking about like how safe I feel, how welcoming I feel, how free and liberated do I feel, but then if can I even get to the space?
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, as you mentioned earlier, these are companies and businesses. So who can afford to literally access the space because of their financial situation? So I think that's really important to mention as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Many of them are not accessible or physical accessibility, and some of them are doing really great things around it. There's a dungeon in Portland, Sub Rosa, that is doing incredible stuff around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and accessibility of their space.
All right. So, we've talked about how do we get to the place where we're ready to go. We talked about once we're there. We'll have to kind of keep in mind what happens after we go home, right? Like, what does aftercare look like in supporting each other, or for yourself or for your partner? Like, what happens there?
Yeah, I think aftercare is such a great conversation to bring up, because we go into this like a floaty, excited kind of headspace. There's a lot of stimulation, and then when we're pulled out of it, we're going back to our real world, our boring clothes, our like regular lives. And sometimes there's an integration piece that needs to happen for people, or a come down piece. So aftercare can happen right after. It can be something that if you're with a partner, maybe you do something to connect with each other, like shower together or share a meal, talk about your favorite parts, have sex to your favorite parts. If you are solo, I used to always come home and take a bath. Like no matter what time, I'd come home at 3 a.m, I'd still draw like a 15-20 minute bath. And for me, it was kind of cleaning other people's energy off of me. And so I could kind of like go back with just me to my bed. Some people also really like to talk about, maybe what went wrong or like what we could do better. I would save that conversation for at least the next day, because people can still kind of be in this vulnerable space for a few days, and they might need some time to come down from it. Other forms of aftercare could just include something that's like low key and relaxing, like cuddling and watching some episodes of your favorite show. If you don't have someone to do that with, or your partner kind of needs to go to bed and you need something different, then make sure you have a list of things that are comforting and soothing for you. So I would usually probably smoke a joint, be in the bath, and then I would do like a rub love for myself, like just rubbing my skin with oil and then like going to bed.
Wait. We didn't talk about like drugs and
We didn't, and like
we talked about that bar situation at the beginning, but I think that's really important. Oh my gosh,
I think so too. Yeah, substance use.
Yeah, substance use at parties.
Yeah, I'd say almost like 90% of kink spaces are sober spaces. And so there's no alcohol on premises. They discourage using any other types of drugs. We're seeing some cannabis kink spaces or cannabis friendly kink spaces coming up a little bit more. In terms of sex clubs, most of them do sell alcohol. If it's a private sex party, they may have a private bar or a BYOB kind of situation. Most discourage any kind of drunken behavior. So if you look like you've had too much, you'll be cut off and probably asked to leave.
It's like the airlines.
It's also better. I know people are using
it. You're too intoxicated. It's like the airlines. You can't fly if you're too intoxicated.
Yeah, take your genitals and leave. Like, you gotta go. Like, this, like, you don't want this kind of behavior here. And if you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, lots of people want this for liquid courage, to kind of feel uninhibited. understandable, but the challenge is that we want to be of clear mind when we're
Right.
communicating around consent and other people's pleasure. I mean, you're meeting strangers. It might not be the same kind of social or arousal response that your partner has, so you need to be a little bit more in tune. And no one wants to go to a club and hang out with a sloppy person. Like, it's not a good look.
Never.
I never really do. It doesn't matter what type of club it is. It's not
Yeah.
my fave environment.
I don't want to be that person.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Glad that we also touched on that, because I think it's really important, because it's especially mentioning the courage aspect and just like wanting to feel a little bit more limber and just open. But you're gonna have to do some meditation or some mirror magic affirmations or something to get you ready, because it's a sober space. So that's really good to remind people of.
Dance, get on that dance floor. Most of them have like bare dance
your
floors, but like what a great way to limber up, to flirt. Like,
Yes. No,
Yeah,
I love that
way.
too. That's a really important piece, because it goes back to the consent piece, right? Like, how do I, if you're messed up, right, how do I effectively then engage with you? I can't.
Yeah. And also, like, when we're talking about what happens when we go home, I mean, sex club or dance club, there are times, especially when alcohol or something's involved, I know there's times I get home like, okay, why did you do that? So really being able to think about how we hold ourselves accountable when we are or are not using substances.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been such a rich conversation. So now let's take our final break and we'll come back to wrap things up. Hey there, listeners, and we're back. Now, as we draw to a close, do you have any final thoughts for us, Luna?
Yeah, I think if you're listening to this and you think, oh, like that might not be for me, or oh my gosh, how can people go there? There's so much around sex and eroticism that we've learned that is very much just replicating mainstream porn. And so realizing that you have more possibilities than what you've seen in porn, and thinking about how this might expand your erotic adventure, maybe it just gives you a great story. Maybe you meet some fun people that you connect with in other ways. I feel that going to these spaces, I've just met really open-minded, adventurous people, and the couples that I meet in these spaces are investing in their relationships. Like, they are going there to expand their experiences together. So it is a really unique experience. And if you even just want to feel better about your body, like being around live sex and hearing live sex noises is so different than porn. And so it really brings us back to like, sex is such a sensory experience, and these bodies that we have are human, and there's so many pleasure possibilities if we get out of this image and that we just need an aesthetic for sex.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so just put on your lingerie and go. Cut your nails.
What are you waiting for, huh?
Yeah, I love it.
Let's go.
And if nothing else, I love that you said, like, you can get a good story out of it. And I
Yeah.
often say, do for the memoir.
Yeah, do it for the blog. I went to a sex club. Here's what happened.
Yes.
7 things I learned
Yeah.
from the Portugal sex club.
Exactly.
Oh man, I love it. And even the pleasure possibilities, I think that's the main thing for me, right? It's like, how do we live in this state of possibility in terms of pleasure?
And also just kind of, again, pushing ourselves to create new comfort zones, right?
Yeah.
And knowing that just being in the environment can do so much for us in an affirming way. And it does not have to look like us trying all the sexual things with all the random people. It could just be in the place and being open and watching and listening and sensing.
Yes.
Yes, all the things. Full body fuck,
Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you again, Luna. It's really been a pleasure. So for this, also, Luna, what we are working to do with this podcast too is give people resources to take with them to do as a part of the podcast. I think that's the big thing for us, is like, how do we make this something more than just this passive listening experience, but something for people to really also interact with. And so I love that you mentioned at the beginning of like this checklist that you go through, because that's what we've worked to develop too, is like this checklist of things to keep in mind for yourself so that you feel as ready as possible to have the joy that you want to in these experiences. So for folks listening, you can find that on our website, to really just take that time to really figure out for yourself what is it that you want out of this experience and how to best prepare yourself to have it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
with that, Luna, would you love to tell people where to find you?
Oh, yeah, sure. You can find me at lunamatatas.com. It's like Hakuna Matatas, but Luna Matatas. And you'll find I think I have 35 webinars on demand right now. One of them is all about sex clubs. So it does have a lot of the tools in more depth than we talked about. And there's about 15 kinky webinars. So if you're interested in getting some skills before you go to the club, you can watch those anytime on demand.
I love that, for that multiverse of kinksters.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Luna. It really has been such a pleasure. And listeners, thank you again for listening today. Next week, I'm really excited. We'll be talking about exploring sex and disability. So we'll continue this conversation of what does it mean to, have accessibility when we talk about sex and sexuality.
Yes.
All right. Bye.
Bye.